Hey everybody, just waiting on Dr. Stacy Sims and Louisa Nicola to join here. Looks like we got some technical difficulties here. Trying to get Louisa to jump in. All right, got Stacy. And let's see. Stacy, where in the world are you today?
I finally landed back in New Zealand a few days ago.
Excellent.
So I'm in my closet, the best place ever to do like lives and podcasts and stuff.
That's all.
And we have builders. So if you hear some banging, it's because we're having some renovations done on the outside of the house.
Ah! It
We made it.
Hi!
Hi!
Well,
Wow, we did
Dr.
it.
Stacy Sims and Louisa, truly an honor to have both of you on our first official Momentous Instagram Live. First off, just it's an honor. Both of you are incredible people, really pushing the boundaries of high performance. And just intro on myself, my name is Jeff Byers. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Momentous. And here at Momentous, we're really working hard and passionate about democratizing high performance. And through these two wonderful women who are leaders in their space, we hope to democratize some of this information today and really share with you what makes these two special, but also give you all some tangible behaviors and lifestyle tips to continue to optimize. So first off, Stacy is absolutely incredible. She has an incredibly famous TED Talk where she talks about women aren't small men, and is really the leader in how we think and are pushing female performance and separating it between performance for men and performance for women. And Louisa is an incredible mindset cognitive coach. Also, both our stud athletes have been very, very successful in their careers and done incredible things. So anyways, Stacy, you want to give a quick intro to who you are, and then Louisa, and what you're really passionate about, and maybe two things that you love about the space you're in.
Gosh, I think the long elevator pitch is I'm a female athlete performance physiologist, but basically that brings it down to I am an exercise physiologist and a nutrition scientist, and I look at the specific needs of women and do research on women across the lifespan and trying to bring that back to the high performance space and human performance space so that women can be empowered and get the best out of what they're doing through nutrition and training.
Amazing. Louisa. Oh, Louisa is frozen.
Oh, no.
We'll get her back in.
We can talk about her.
Yeah,
Am I back?
You're back.
There you are, yeah.
Guys, I'm so sorry, not sure what happened, but I heard all of that. So hi guys, Louisa Nicola. I am a neurophysiologist and brain coach to elite athletes. So like Stacy, who she said she's an exercise physiologist, which is, I always say that's from the neck down. I usually work from the neck up. So a lot of what I do with athletes involves neurophysiology, which is using EEGs, which is one of those funny caps that you put on your head, and we measure brainwave activity. And so it's using an EEG or doing a nerve conduction study or an EMG, and really pinpointing where our athletes are having dysfunctions. So for example, the EEG that I use is able to pick up on visual processing. So we're able to really understand how well their visual system is working. We're able to look at information processing speed. So with a lot of our NBA players, we're able to measure from the moment that they get the ball to the moment that they throw the ball and how accurate that can be. And we really work on bringing each of those metrics smaller and decreasing the time. So it's very specific, but if you had to ask me, what's the things that I love about my space, I think I love nutrition, I love sleep, and I love different forms of strength training and how they relate to overall brain health.
Awesome. We're going to dig into sleep and weight training and how it's connected to brain health, because it's fascinating. But Stacy, I'm gonna jump into you, and I think one of the things that is most powerful as I've gotten to know you is you're not afraid to say how it is. And I think that's really powerful in a space where what I've learned is almost all clinical research has been done on white dudes in their 18 to 20s. And that not only is a very small set of the population, it negates 50% of the population. And here as a man, like, my hormones are incredibly consistent and normal. We just slowly decline over time. Whereas that is not the case for half the population. And one of the things that I'm on this journey for democratizing high performance is how do we learn and elevate your knowledge. And so my question to you is, can you just share a little bit about, female hormones and how they interact and affect the performer, and really how maybe one or two tips that you can give, both to women, but also to men out there who have significant others who are athletes, me, or daughters or friends, to elevate our knowledge so we can further support their performance.
Yeah, the first thing I really want to point out is when we're talking about female hormones, there's a difference between training and leveraging hormones for training versus that one point in time for performance. So we know that the on-the-day performance, there are so many factors that go into making that the day to be on fire. And hormone perturbations have a minimal effect. But if we talk about female sex hormones, we have estrogen and progesterone. And we know that they're relatively low when you start bleeding with your menstrual cycle, first day all the way to around day 13. And then estrogen surges right before ovulation. Then after ovulation, estrogen and progesterone start to come up. And estrogen and progesterone affect every system of the body. So we know that it affects the way that we can harness our power, our strength, our ability to recover, our mood, our mojo, our aggression. All of these things are affected by female sex hormones. And it's another play when we're looking at oral contraceptive pill, and the way that oral contraceptive pill can also affect our systems just slightly differently because they're an external hormone, not an internal hormone. And then we also have puberty all the way through perimenopause and postmenopause when those hormones flatline. So all across a woman's lifespan, there are these hormone perturbations that affect her ability to really adapt to training. And we can leverage times when these hormones are low to really maximize our training stress, because that's when women's bodies are really resilient to external stress and can take it on and absorb it. But the few days before the period starts, when we have an elevation of estrogen, progesterone, we have a massive inflammatory response, which is kind of something that inhibits our ability to really adapt. So if we start tracking our cycles, regardless of if you are naturally cycling or on an oral contraceptive pill or you're on an IUD, that's the big rock, to understand your hormone profile and how you respond to training across the month, because we can start to see patterns in that in our own individual cycles. So if we know that, say, on day 3, I feel fantastic, then I can start planning to do a really heavy training load on that day. But say on day 18, I feel really flat, then I know that I'm not probably going to get the most out of my training on that day. So I'm going to back it down a bit. So there are some generalizations around hormones. Like we know low hormone time, really good for doing high intensity strength work and high intensity aerobic work. And then as we get closer to the menstrual cycle starting again, or the period starting again, we kind of deload. But within that schematic, every woman's a little bit different. So the one big thing I ask every woman to do is know their hormone profile and how they interact with their training and their sleep across a complete cycle. Because then you can really get some objective data to dial in your training and start to find ways to make you feel better, train better, adapt better, and give yourself that extra 2% instead of always fighting the wall.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just have to jump in here. So is there anything similar to men? So I know you're talking about women having to track their cycles, knowing their hormones so they can train better and perform better. And that's all, that's something that I learned from you as well. But what about men? Do men just get to go out there and just train whenever they want and have no interruptions at all?
Yeah, for the most part, because if we look at all the training metrics that we use for tracking recovery and tracking adaptation, first and foremost, almost every test that's out there to look at performance has been done on men and then generalized to women. So things like VO2 tests, lactate threshold tests, ventilatory threshold tests, all of those things. We look at 1 rep max and how you build up to your 1 rep max. We know that women are more endurance, so they don't need as much recovery between in order to hit that 1 rep. But a lot of these protocols are not designed for or followed by women properly. So when we start looking at like what kinds of things we can do and how can we leverage it, again, we still have a lot of scientific information to dig through and designs of studies to do to actually be able to pinpoint, hey, you know what, you are on day 12 of your menstrual cycle and this is exactly what we know you should do. So this is why we're looking at what a female hormone profile is and understanding it versus men, where men, they age in a linear fashion. So they might have perturbances in their recovery in their day, but that's more of an external stress. It's not hormone driven. So things like your heart rate variability, we know that heart rate variability changes across the menstrual cycle. So when estrogen, progesterone come up, you have a decrease in your heart rate variability. But for men, we don't have that. So they are constantly looking at all these metrics that can tell them how they're adapting. But for women, you have to be aware of where you are in your cycle to be able to interpret those metrics a little bit differently to maximize what you're doing.
It's so interesting. I keep cutting Jeff off, but yeah, I just think about when I was a triathlete, and this is, dating back, wow, probably, 10 years ago now, but we weren't taught any of this.
No, don't do the math. Don't do the math.
Yeah, it upsets me. You've already upset me by telling me pretty much that men don't have any problems whatsoever. So that's already, out there. But no, well, back when, the reason, Jeff, and Stacy, why I love, what we do, and even speaking about sleep, is because when I was an athlete, I was not taught to sleep. We were actually taught, Louisa, the more that you sleep, the less that you're on the bike. And we were training 5 hours a day. That's a lot to put on, I was, 17, 18, like that. That's a lot to put on a woman at that age. And we weren't taught to sleep. We were not, I was trained by a male and all my teammates were male. So we weren't taught anything around female physiology. And I dare say if I knew what I knew back then, like I would have been much better off. If I knew how to sleep back then, if I knew about supplementation, if I knew how to track my hormones and train around my menstrual cycle, I probably would have been a better athlete.
Yeah, me too. And that's why I'm pushing it out now, so that our daughters and other people can be empowered to do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is fascinating. So I got my number one tip, right? That what I'm hearing, I'm going to repeat it, is you got to track your cycle, right? To really even understand the baseline, right? I'll raise my hand and say, like, this is not me, but this is very fascinating to understand the changes that are happening, and just, right, where we're at really low hormone level, you can train at your highest intensity. Like, that's quite fascinating to me. Whereas I would, like, in male, I would assume, like, when you're at your peak hormone levels is when you can train at the highest intensity, right? When testosterone is just ripping through a young adolescent male. when you feel
Yeah,
like,
and that's good for guys. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, but not for women.
But not for women.
Yeah,
No.
fascinating how that is exactly the opposite there. I mean, I guess, Stacy, part of the challenge here is like we've had a systemic issue in how we do clinical research. What are the things that are happening? What are you seeing today that is changing some of that, um, like the systemic wave that broke way back when we started doing clinical research? Like, how are you promoting? Like, where is really good research being done right now across the globe?
Yeah, so we have written quite a few methodology papers. We, as in there are 3 different groups, myself and a couple of us in New Zealand, Catherine Ackerman's group out of Harvard, Kirsty Elliott Sales group out of the UK. And so we've developed these methodology papers for people to actually know how to design studies. And we're seeing a huge uptick in that, where as a peer reviewer, things coming in and we're asking and pushing back now, well, why are women not included? The data isn't appropriate. You didn't analyze it properly. So as we're having this groundswell of all of us who are academics coming up into more senior positions, we're able to push back against the norm, which is exciting to see, because in the past maybe 3 or 4 years, we're starting to get a lot of good uptake on proper methodological design and understanding that some of the studies that we've been hanging our hats on need to be redone for women. And so from the sports science and exercise physiology standpoint, we still have a long way to go, but it's now in a broader sense in biomedical research, where things even like when people are doing basic bench science on rats, they can't just use male rats. They actually have to include female rats and understand that there's an estrus cycle in female rats too. So it's not just the research for women being done on female rats. It's looking at both male and female rats across the spectrum. So it's interesting that we have things like the NIH that's been mandating women to be included since the 1990s, but it's just recently we've really seen this uptick and push for inclusion and equality. We still have a long way to go, but fingers crossed that we've got that tipping point and we're starting to really make some inroads.
Yeah, there was a question about right, what happens in menopause when you don't have the hormone fluctuation, like if everything's based upon the cycle and you lose that.
Yep. So this is a completely different hormone profile. So when those hormones flatline and drop off, we see that we need to do external stressors that would take the place of how these hormones used to support us. So estrogen is tightly tied to power and strength because of its inherent interactions with myosin, with acetylcholine for nerve junction. So we have to look at lifting heavy loads that is going to stimulate the body to overcome that load and develop lean mass, rather than doing light loads and having estrogen take the bulk of the stimulus for lean mass. We look at how we mitigate our body composition. There's some really cool research that's just coming out looking at the gut microbiome and seeing this massive shift in diversity in late perimenopause, which increases adiposity in postmenopause and in that transition. So now we have to look at diet closely and increasing the amount of fibrous fruit and veg to increase the diversity. So there are things that we do, and when we're looking at how we're responding to training, we look at sleep metrics, we look at HRV, because now we don't have a change in the autonomic nervous system with menstrual cycle, so we can start relying a little bit more on our typical metrics for recovery and being able to see how we sleep, how we recover against our training, knowing that when you hit postmenopause and the menopause transition and starting to have the flat line of those hormones, we need a little bit more recovery, but we also need a higher intensity stimulus to get adaptations.
That's really fascinating.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, go.
And it's around perimenopause. Actually, this is really interesting. So I'm doing a lot of research in Alzheimer's disease, which a lot of people know. And just recently, I heard there's a wonderful neurologist, Dr. Isaacson, and he said, Stacy, that perimenopause is seen as a brain disease. And I'm talking now just as what a woman goes through neurologically. So if you really look at some of the symptoms of menopause, you see fatigue, brain fog, fluctuations in mood, and he said that we should now be pushing to have this not as a disease, but really more so pushing out there, talking about perimenopause and the changes that happen in a woman's brain during that time that can affect everything from the way that they live, the way that they sleep, the way that they train. And I wanted to know what your opinion is on that.
Can you define for the people who don't know, because I didn't know until like 3 weeks ago, what is perimenopause? While you answer.
Sure. Yeah. So perimenopause, it can start as early as 35, but most of the time we see it happen in their mid 40s through early 50s. So everyone thinks that hormone changes and fluctuations that affect our body composition, our sleep and hot flashes is all menopause. But menopause is actually just one point on the calendar that marks 12 months of no periods. And it's the 5 to 10 years before that one point in time that's called perimenopause. So this is where we start to see changes in the ratios of estrogen progesterone because we're having more and more anovulatory cycles, so we're not producing as much progesterone. And like I said, we have estrogen progesterone receptor sites in every system of the body, including the brain. And so when we start looking at what's happening with these hormones, unfortunately, one of the most automatic responses is take hormone therapy. But the body doesn't, I guess the best way to say it, doesn't metabolize external hormones the same as it does your natural hormones. So it doesn't do exactly the same thing. And the other thing that happens during perimenopause, because you're having these fluctuations in hormones, you're also reducing sensitivity of your estrogen progesterone receptor sites. So even if you are taking external hormones, your body's not necessarily going to respond the right way that you think it should because you have a reduction in the sensitivity of the receptor sites. So we say it's a therapy to get you through hot flashes, to get you through mood swings, poor sleep. But when we start looking at things like calling it a disease, I really push back on that. It's the fact that women are aging. It's always been there. You can guarantee that any woman is going to go through puberty and they're going to go through perimenopause into menopause. In the UK, there was pushback because they are calling it female hormone deficiency syndrome. And that makes people think, oh, I need to replace. But we don't need to replace. We need to understand that our bodies are changing and this is completely normal, completely natural. And there are therapies to help get through this, but that doesn't mean we're diseased. It doesn't mean we need to replace things. It just means we have to have a different eye of what we can do to support our bodies in this transition. And this is why we look at external stressors that are going to overload the system and support the system the way those hormones used to, which is, strength training for huge benefits to the brain. And Louisa can talk about that for sure.
This is a great transition.
Yeah.
Louisa, to one of
yeah.
When we first met in person for the first time, we talked about strength training and the cognitive benefits and what that actually means. And so why don't you dive in a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I love this field because when we think of exercise, and the brain, I always go back in time and talk about the timeline because you look at 1999 and even the early 2000s, we're all hearing about this word BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that is a growth factor for the brain. So when we started to do the first research on exercise and brain health, and obviously it was done in rodent models. So when we were looking at rats, we're primarily just looking at aerobic physical activity. So we weren't looking at strength training, and that's what I love now. So I'll talk about first and foremost the effects of aerobic activity on the brain, because there are many. So it turns out that when we do aerobic physical activity, such as a long run or a bike ride or swimming, we're generally looking at around, I would say, 60 to 70% of our maximum heart rate for an extended period of time. What we see a massive release or uptake of BDNF. And what we've found in the rodent models, we've found that we can grow new neurons in certain parts of the brain. Now, this is called neurogenesis. And I want to be really I just want to be really careful with what I say here, because neurogenesis, while it does mean the creation of new neurons, we can't grow new neurons in the human. We can't do that. It's a lot of controversy around that, but we can do it in an area in the brain deep in our temporal lobes called the hippocampus. And so we know from exercise, like aerobic physical activity, that we if we engage in it for 3 or 4 days a week, we can grow new neurons in the hippocampus in this area of the brain. So that's where we lie in terms of physical activity, aerobic activity, and brain health. But if we fast forward a few years, it was only a few years ago that we started to really understand the effects of strength training on brain health. And that's where I think all the magic is. And that's where I think the future lies when it comes to academic research. I think there's going to be way more things that we can uncover. But some of the things that strength training does for brain health is, first and foremost, when we engage in strength training or resistance training, I'll call it, our muscles, our skeletal muscles, release myokines. And these myokines are muscle-based proteins. So we've got several of them. We've got IL-6, we've got lactate, we've got irisin. And when these are released, and they're released robustly from the skeletal muscle, they then go through and act on different receptors in the brain and on different receptors in the endocrine system. So we've got receptors on our liver, on our heart, and in our brain. So when they get released from the muscle, they go through the bloodstream and they can travel up and cross the blood-brain barrier. And our blood-brain barrier, we hear about this as well so often. It's also misunderstood. People think that we've got this cap on our brain, when in actual fact, it's just the epithelial layer on the outside of the brain. It's just cells like this. And if we've got a leaky gut, these cells kind of like, open up like this, and it can allow like different molecules to go in, and it keeps other molecules from going in. But these myokines can cross through the blood-brain barrier and have an effect on cognitive functions. Cognitive functions such as thinking, information processing speed, executive functions, and we see a robust amount that is released. So I'm not just talking about going out and just doing a few push-ups and you get a minor release. You actually get a huge release of these myokines, and you wouldn't be able to get a release of these myokines in any other way. One specifically is irisin. I think that's an important myokine that we can't really get from doing anything else.
That's really fascinating when we think about how strength training can influence cognitive performance. What is the definition of strength training, Louisa? Like how would somebody say, hey, I'm anaerobic versus aerobic? Like, how do we know when we're in that zone? Like, what is some good examples to give people?
Well, Stacy could probably answer this better, but from what I'm speaking about, and I want to be clear about this too, is you have to be pushing heavy. So you can't just go into a gym and pick up, some light dumbbells. You have to be working at 70% of your 1 repetition max. So that's really working hard. And then you also need to be doing this 3 times a week. And if you do it more, you will get more of a release. So, but obviously, you can't go and do this each day because you need to recover. But obviously, as our body adapts, you need to keep upping the weights. So, and you can, and the effects that I'm talking about have to be coming from actual strength training, resistance training with heavy weights. So this is not calisthenic training, like just with body weight.
So Louisa, like 70% 1 rep max.
Yeah.
That, like, is there a length of time where you go to the gym and you say, hey, I'm going to do 5 sets of 5 back squat and then 5 sets of 5 of hang cleans? Is that right?
Yeah. And you generally want to be working on, and if you generally want to be working on compound movements and as many muscle groups as possible. I always go into the gym, and Stacy, you've probably seen this as well. And I see girls just lifting these little, just doing the accessory muscles, if they still call it that, doing these tiny little, I don't even know what they are, with these 1 little, 1 pound dumbbells. And I would love to change that story in the gym. I would love to see women not being afraid of weights, not being afraid to lift heavy, but also learning how to squat. It sounds ridiculous because everyone knows how to generally squat, but really, really knowing how to hip hinge, really knowing, the length of your femur, really understanding how to press up and squat perfectly. I think you can just go all the way until, your 90s and going to 100s, if you learn how to squat well.
That's fast.
Yep. And it's really hard to convince endurance athletes to strength train. There's so many women who are in their 40s and beyond who are endurance athletes who are like, I don't like the gym. And I'm trying to understand, is it the culture of the gym or is it actually strength training? Because if it's strength training, it could be that they haven't actually learned how and they feel really intimidated, where they feel powerful as an endurance athlete because that's their thing. So it is about that education and that empowerment to get women into the gym and not be directed to the cardio, but be directed to the squat rack.
But I think, okay, I always say that education is the way. So I think first and foremost, learning, putting a culture around just learning the basics. Honestly, it's just learning the basics, right? That's the first thing. But also you mentioned that women are endurance athletes are afraid. And that's also an education thing, because a lot of women think I'm going to get big and bulky. And it's like, to even, be able to grow a pound of muscle, it's a really hard thing to do. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you get older, especially for women, you become more and more anabolically resistant. So it's harder to build muscle. And if, there's a question here, how do you make sure you don't get very muscular? You have to eat a lot. So I think one of the first images that came, like when women start thinking about powerlifting and doing compound movements, are things like Miss Olympia or some professional bodybuilders, or they're watching the Olympics and they see Olympic weightlifters. They eat a lot. They don't do cardio and they eat a lot. You have to have abundance of calories in order to build tissue. So most women aren't going to eat and train the way it is required to become super bulky. You'll get toned, but you have to make sure that you're eating protein, you're eating on a regular basis, and you're hitting the strength, and you're not going to get bulky.
And I just want to point out as well, there's a great study, guys, on my Instagram. I think I put it up like in June, but I put up a wonderful study that showed the correlation between muscle mass and all-cause mortality. And it turns out that as we age and we see a decline in our in muscle, as we get older, what happens is when we, sarcopenia, when we reach, the age of, let's just say 80, and you fall over and you break your hip. This is how the study was done. All-cause mortality just goes through the roof after you have had a broken bone. So being able to starve off these events, such as tripping over at the age of 70, 75, 80, or falling and hitting, smacking yourself on the floor and breaking a bone, you want to be able to prepare for that. You want to be able to prepare just in case you do take a fall, then maybe that your bones are strong enough to not break, because as soon as they break, I forget the statistics, I really should have looked it up, but yeah, it's really scary, the amount of people that actually decline immensely because they can't, it's very hard to recover from a hip operation at the age of 80. So all-cause mortality just, increases completely.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, we are getting close to time here, but want to make sure we have like we've answered some questions. But I think for me, Stacy, right, like what would be, you gave some great tips to women, and right, like premenopause, perimenopause, and menopause, and to me, like what would you give advice to right, the other half to help support in this, right? Somebody who has a daughter, right, going through this, on how could I or their male counterpart better support and understand what they're going through to give them, right, the necessary coaching to be a high performer at all times.
Yeah, it's that conversation about menstrual cycle that still can get people off on the back foot.
Yeah.
So like if you are a coach or you're working with athletes, we look at using some of the femtech that's out there. So like Wild AI that has a coaching platform. So your daughter or your athlete or your partner can actually track their cycle and get information about what they should be doing according to their own cycle. And then they can either have conversation with you, but if you're a coach, you can have a coaching platform and connect all of your athletes and look and see where they are, if they're having problems or not. But really, like, I love the story when I introduced femtech to one of my colleagues, and he got his wife on it, and he's like all into it, and so is she. So it's just having that ability to just to broach that conversation. Just the introduction of an app to somebody opens up that conversation. They don't have to be into the details, but it's just, are you tracking? Are you following?
Yeah.
How are you feeling today?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be, tell me exactly what your bleed phase is like and all the stuff that makes people cringe. It's just like, are you tracking? How are you feeling today? You know, what has it told you? How, you know, how is your sleep? So it's just broaching that conversation, but it starts with a simple tracking. Is it tracking with an app? Is it tracking on a piece of paper? And it doesn't have to be embarrassing because it's just a health question.
Yeah.
We know that women who have a period and are regularly cycling are very sound with regards to endocrine function, with regards to having enough calories. So having a period is a really good metric of health.
That's awesome. You said the app was Wild AI, correct? Or
yes. Yep.
How many, I mean, just how many collegiate athletic programs are actually like giving this information to the coaching staff to allow them to train better and really be enhanced? Do you know?
I don't know. I keep hearing, I hear about young athletes whose parents have heard me, or some have been following the stuff that's been going on, and they are having the conversation amongst themselves about tracking, and then they broach it to the coach, and the coach is like, whoa, okay, well, this is pretty cool. We can put this in the wellness. It's starting to get some uptick, and more professional female or professional women's teams are doing the same thing. So it's like the trickle up and trickle down effect. So watch this space.
That's really incredible. So, all right, before I move on to Louisa, there was a question about supplements, which a nice question. Well, if you had two supplements, Louisa, or sorry, Stacy, to say every woman should take this, what would those be?
Creatine and collagen.
And why?
Creatine, because it helps with all the fast energetics in the body. And women have around 70 to 80% of the stores that men do. And we only produce 1 gram per day. But we know it helps significantly with brain health. We know it helps with gut health, with muscle power and strength. So it's not a large dose. It's 3 to 5 grams a day. And then collagen is more as you're getting older, past your 30s, because you start really losing it and not being able to get enough in through food. And you have to be specific. Are you looking at peptides or are you looking at native? So you have to look and say, okay, well, I'm having more and more joint issues. So I want type 2, and I want a native to cause an immune response so that my body isn't going to start or keep degrading my cartilage. And I want peptides so that I can actually absorb them and they can go to where the hole is in the cartilage and stimulate less degeneration. So those are my 2 big ones.
Amazing, love it. Just to repeat what I heard from you is know your cycle, track your cycle, and be open about that. And then strength train when you're in perimenopause and in menopause as those hormones begin to decrease to really help replace what you've lost as your estrogen levels decline. My 2 takeaways from you. Louisa, on to you. I guess just beyond this strength training for cognitive performance and longevity, what is the other major behavior? This is a leading question because I know the answer. Behavior tip that you can have to say, if you can focus on one thing for cognitive function, what would it be?
Oh, one thing for cognitive function. Damn. So I have to go with sleep, obviously. You know, I see constantly in the literature that you have to start with sleep. And I work in 3 domains. It's, you know, nutrients for brain health, it's exercise, and it's sleep. So if you can work on these 3 things, which Mother Nature gifted us, get those right first, and then you can start working your way up from that. But there is no way that you can get by in terms of training or being even just a worker, or even if you're in sales, it doesn't matter what you're doing in your life, you have to be sleeping. So sleep quality, both efficiency and quantity and quality.
Love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
sleep is, I would say all the experts we have the honor to work with, sleep is number one, or top two on all of their list of things and behaviors that you can do to be a better performer, whether that you're a professional athlete or CEO or just somebody trying to be better every single day. Same question to you, Louisa. Two supplements, what would they be? They can be the same or they can be different from Stacy.
Well, I was going to say creatine, so well done, Stacy. We're both, creatine is absolutely incredible for the brain. And I too, whether you're going to load it or not load it, but 3 to 5 milligrams a day. But I have to say EPA, DHA, which many people know as omega-3 fatty acids, which come from fatty fish, mackerel, salmon. We know that there's 3 parts to omega-3. There's ALA, there's EPA, and there's DHA. Now, the ALA is really the plant form. You can get this from algae, from chia seeds, from flax seeds. But I'm really talking specifically about EPA and DHA, specifically DHA. And these are the two things, EPA and DHA, that are really going to help with brain health, but also help with inflammation. So we know that when we take high doses of EPA, DHA, it can really help regulate the inflammatory response that we get from stress, from not sleeping, from eating bad food. In terms of dosages, you want to be looking at having 2 grams of each per day. So it's 4 grams in total of EPA and DHA.
That is a lot of omegas. But what I find very fascinating is one of our other experts, a guy named Dr. Andy Galpin. He says creatine is the Michael Jordan of supplements, the greatest of all time. But it's this massively misunderstood supplement, and partially due to bodybuilding back in the day on what it had for that impact, but really the cognitive performance implications of it, but also cognitive longevity, all the studies in Alzheimer's, dementia, traumatic brain injury, when you think about military contact sports, of what the impact creatine has and the role it plays is so high. And we have to break this stigma around creatine and some of the negatives, but really it is the Michael Jordan of supplements, and things you can do for your overall health, and it costs nothing. Relatively, it's such an inexpensive supplement when it comes down to it. It's a commodity, which is so fascinating across the board. So I'm just going to repeat your biggest takeaways, Louisa. Right, strength training, right, releases a ton of myokines into your body, right? And what's so important is it unlocks cognitive performance and cognitive function. And what that really means is when that happens in strength training is when you're about 70% one rep max, and you should be doing those types of lifts or exercises up to or more than 3 times a week, which is really quite fascinating to understand across the board. And that is right, multi-joint movements, hang cleans, Olympic lifts, squats, but also make sure you do them right, is what I heard. And it does take a coach or a trainer to help that. And then your two, rock star supplements would be creatine and high dose EPA, DHA. So I guess like the last thing, I'm truly honored to have you a part of the Momentous family. You both have given so much as we really work to how do we democratize high performance, bring better knowledge, and bring access and highlight what you two are doing as you're really trying to push beyond what is known out there, and also break systemic changes. Like Stacy, what you're doing in female performance is so incredibly impactful, and we're honored to be a part of that. So thank you, both of you. At Momentous, there's a question about what brands should you use.
Yeah, I saw those too.
I know, I saw that. I was like, there is no other brand. Momentous, come on.
Momentous, we make some of the best, highest quality products on the market, from supplements to protein and sports nutrition. We're trusted by 200 plus pro and college teams, and we work with incredible experts. And really what we're trying to do is bring best in class knowledge and guidance, and curate some of these best minds for people to have better access to what is actually happening out there. where can people find you, Stacy? And how should they get a hold of you, or what's the best way if they have additional questions?
Instagram, of course, Dr. Stacy Sims, and that's DR for the doctor. Same as our website, drstacysims.com. If you have questions, you can email through the website or DM me on Instagram. And then for those who might still use Facebook, I'm on there too.
Stacy also has one of the best books out there. You should check it out as well. Nice little plug there. And you're working on another book or about ready to launch?
We launched the second book, Next Level, in May, and that's all for the peri and postmenopause space. We're currently working on the second edition of Roar that should be out early to mid next year.
Oh, excellent. Love it. So follow Dr. Stacy Sims on Instagram, grab her books, plural, and really continue to advocate for clinical research on the female. And as you can support that, if you do give back to universities and things like that, I challenge you to make sure that is happening. And know the cycle, know what's happening as a husband, as a father, to really help your better halves perform, or your daughters perform better. On to you, Louisa. Where can people find you, and what's the best way to get more of your info?
I'm pretty active here on Instagram. I have a website, neuroathletics.com.au, but definitely go and check out the podcast, The Neuro Experience. I've had Stacy on there, and it's just a wealth of information. It's like going to like a mini university, but everything's on there. It's available on all platforms.
Excellent. Thank you all. Stacy, Louisa, I've said it multiple times, but we are truly honored to have both of you be a part of the company and what we're building here. Both of them have recommended protocols and info on the website as well, if you want to dig into more about what products and some information around that. But thank you all.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Louisa.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful day, Stacy, and a great.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
Thanks.